The room was heavy with silence, the kind that chokes the air before a storm breaks. In Ouagadougou, under a moonless Sahel sky, President Ibrahim Traoré sat at a battered wooden desk, his face lit only by the dim glow of a laptop screen. His fingers gripped the edges, knuckles whitening as his eyes locked onto a single line in a leaked email: "Delay the Yelain funds, or we expose the bases." The words burned into him, like a brand, a threat from faceless powers across the ocean. Outside, the hum of a generator faltered, plunging the capital streets into shadow, a reminder of the darkness gripping 60% of Burkina Faso's rural souls, where families lived by flickering kerosene lamps, their dreams dimmed by neglect. Traoré's jaw tightened. He was no stranger to battles, warrior leader, son of the soil, but this was different. This was a war of whispers, of hidden hands, trying to choke the life out of his vision, the Yelain project, a promise to bring light to 150 forgotten villages through solar grids and hybrid systems. A promise of dignity, not just power. His advisor Aminata stood by the door, her sharp eyes scanning the room for unseen threats. Malik, his loyal bodyguard, hovered near hand, resting on a holster, sensing the weight of the moment. The laptop pinged a new message. Traoré clicked and his breath caught. A grainy photo loaded a Western diplomat shaking hands with a local minister, a briefcase between them stamped with a consulting firm's logo. The caption read, "The price of light is too high." He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight, his military fatigues creased from sleepless nights. The email wasn't just a threat, it was a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Foreign powers cloaked in promises of aid were scheming to keep Burkina Faso in the dark, to chain its future to their military bases and resource grabs. Traoré's gaze shifted to a faded map on the wall pinned with markers. For every village, Yelain would illuminate schools where kids could read past dust, clinics saving mothers and babies, farmers powering pumps to feed the nation. His people, the ones who'd been exploited, ignored, left to scrape by under colonial shadows that never truly faded. The phone on the desk buzzed, shattering the silence. A number flashed, encrypted, untraceable. Traoré's hand hovered over it, his heart pounding like a war drum. Answer it, and he'd step into a trap laid by those who saw Africa's rise as a threat. Ignore it, and risk losing the funding to light up his country. The stakes were clear. One call could spark a revolution or snuff out hope for millions. In that moment, with the weight of a continent on his shoulders, Traoré's eyes burned with defiance. What would he do, and who was watching from the shadows waiting to strike? Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. If this story speaks to you, it means you're part of something bigger, a movement that believes Africa deserves to tell its own story in its own voice. Leave a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We want to see how far this light is reaching. Dust swirled through the streets of Ouagadougou, catching the faint glow of streetlights that flickered like a dying pulse. In Burkina Faso's rural heartlands, where over 60% of the nation's people carved out lives in villages untouched by steady electricity, the night was a thief stealing hours from children who studied by the weak flicker of kerosene lamps, robbing clinics of the power to save lives, and chaining farmers to back-breaking days without machines to ease their toil. This was the battleground Ibrahim Traoré called home, a land where the sun blazed with promise but left millions in darkness when it set. The year was 2025, and Traoré, a man forged in the fires of revolution, stood as Burkina Faso's beacon. A leader who wore his military fatigues like armor, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of a nation's dreams. In a modest government office, the air thick with the scent of coffee and determination, Traoré leaned over a table strewn with maps and blueprints. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, traced the lines of the Yelain project named Light in Diola, a word that hummed with hope. The plan was bold: solar, mini-grids, hybrid systems, and rooftop panels to electrify 150 neglected villages, bringing power to schools, clinics, and farms. It wasn't just about watts and volts, it was about dignity, about breaking the chains of a system that kept Burkina Faso's rural majority, over 12 million strong, locked in the shadows of a world that moved on without them. Traoré's face, weathered yet resolute, betrayed a fire within, part warrior, part visionary, a man who'd seen his people struggle up close from the dusty fields of his childhood to the halls of power he now commanded. Beside him stood Aminata Diallo, his trusted advisor, a woman whose roots ran deep in the same rural soils. Her quick mind and unyielding spirit had shaped Yelain's framework, her glasses glinting as she pointed to a village marker on the map, her voice steady. "This is where we start, Ibrahim. These people aren't just numbers, they're us." Her presence grounded him, a reminder of the stakes beyond politics. Nearby, Malik Traoré's bodyguard stood like a sentinel, his broad frame filling the doorway, eyes scanning for threats. His loyalty was ironclad, forged in battles both seen and unseen, his hand never far from the holster at his side. Malik knew the whispers of betrayal that followed power, especially when it dared to defy the West. Across the city in a sleek hotel bathed in artificial light, a French ambassador sipped wine with a polished smile, his words dripping with promises of partnerships that masked ultimatums. He met with local ministers, some wavering under the weight of briefcases stuffed with foreign cash, their loyalty to Burkina Faso tested by the allure of personal gain. The ambassador's aide, a young woman with a tablet full of encrypted files, typed furiously drafting terms that would tie aid to military concessions bases near the very lands Yelain aimed to empower. In the shadows of these meetings, a network of journalists, activists, and local leaders buzzed with hope and suspicion, their voices rising in markets and mosques, all asking, could Traoré's vision survive the vultures circling it? The stage was set in a nation at a crossroads where every village without light was a wound, and every step toward Yelain was a declaration of war against exploitation. Traoré stood at the center, his fatigues creased from sleepless nights, his heart beating for the kids who'd read under real bulbs, the mothers who'd survived childbirth in powered clinics, the farmers who'd grind grain after dusk. But the leaked email from the Hook lingered in his mind, a warning that the fight for light was also a fight for sovereignty. As he stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city, the distant hum of a generator faltered again, plunging half the skyline into black. Traoré's fists clenched. This wasn't just about power lines, it was about power itself, and who would wield it for Africa's future. The first sparks of Yelain flickered to life in a remote village called Kaya, where the sun-baked earth had long swallowed the dreams of its people. For generations, folks here had risen with the dawn and surrendered to the night, their lives tethered to the rhythm of a world without power. But now, under Traoré's unyielding gaze, solar panels gleamed on rooftops like shields against the dark. Mini-grids hummed quietly, feeding energy to hybrid systems that lit up homes, schools, and clinics. Kids gathered in classrooms after sunset, their faces illuminated by screens instead of smoky lamps, typing away on computers that connected them to a world beyond the horizon. In the local health center, nurses sighed with relief as refrigerators whirred, preserving vaccines that once spoiled in the heat, slashing maternal and infant deaths that had haunted families for too long. Farmers, those backbone warriors of Burkina Faso, cranked up irrigation pumps and processing machines, turning harvests into profits that created jobs and filled bellies. The air buzzed with possibility, doors creaking open past dusk, laughter echoing from shops that no longer shuttered at twilight. Yelain wasn't just electricity, it was a revival touching over 150 villages, proving that Africa's light could shine from within. Yet, as the glow spread, so did the shadows. Traoré paced the dimly lit corridors of his Ouagadougou headquarters, the weight of success pressing down like an unseen storm. Reports flooded in villages, transformed economies, stirring hope, igniting. But buried in the stack of papers was a single folder, unmarked and ominous, slipped under his door by an anonymous hand. He flipped it open, his breath catching as the words leaped out, a leaked memo from a Western embassy stamped with the seal of so-called allies. The document laid bare the sabotage, delays in shipping critical solar equipment, funds frozen in bureaucratic limbo, all tied to a sinister demand. No military bases near the grids, the memo sneered in coded language, or the light goes out. Traoré's fists clenched, veins bulging like rivers ready to flood. This wasn't aid. It was extortion, a ploy to plant foreign flags on Burkina Faso's sovereign soil, right beside the very resources Yelain aimed to harness for the people. The revelation hit him like a gut punch. He slammed the folder shut, his mind racing back to the faces in those villages, the mothers who'd lost children to preventable illnesses, the elders whose wisdom faded in unlit nights, the youth hungry for a future not dictated by outsiders. Aminata burst into the room, her eyes wide with urgency. "Ibrahim, there's more," she whispered, handing him a tablet. On the screen, hacked emails scrolled like a confession payoffs, funneled through shadowy consulting firms to corrupt ministers within his own ranks. Names he trusted, hands he'd shaken, now stained with betrayal. One email detailed a mistranslated clause in an aid agreement buried on page 168 that would cede control of resource-rich lands, gold mines, and fertile fields to Western interests under the guise of investment protection. Traoré's teeth ground together, a low growl escaping his throat. "Modern-day chains?" he muttered, his voice laced with the fury of a man who'd fought coups and colonizers alike. These weren't just delays. They were daggers aimed at the heart of Burkina Faso's independence, designed to keep the Sahel dim and dependent. As the intrigue deepened, whispers of espionage slithered through the capital. Suspicious outages plagued test sites, grids flickering off without warning, leaving villages in blackout just as hope took root. Malik, ever vigilant, reported tales on key engineers, foreign journalists lurking near project hubs, their cameras hiding more than lenses. Traoré's inner circle tightened, paranoia mingling with resolve. He thought of the broader canvas, the AES Grid, his grand vision to link Burkina Faso with Mali, Niger, Chad, and 11 other nations, a web of power serving 250 million souls, slashing costs by 30%, even exporting energy to North Africa and Europe on African terms. But the leaked docs exposed the West's fear no foreign bases allowed near this shared infrastructure, a clause that shattered their grip. Reactions poured in, sanctions threatened, loans scythed, invitations to regional conferences revoked under French pressure. Traoré's rage boiled over reports of rising deaths in unelectrified zones where darkness still claimed lives. "They call it partnership," he seethed to Aminata, "but I see the noose tightening." The conflict escalated in a midnight meeting at a secure bunker where Traoré gathered his loyalists. Maps of the AES Grid sprawled across the table lines connecting nations like veins of an awakening giant. But overlays showed red flags, cyber probes from Western IPs, attempted hacks on the underground fiber optic network that would carry not just power but digital sovereignty, secure data for education, telemedicine, precision farming, and encrypted defense comms. One attack in 2027 had been thwarted, the memo bragged, but only because Traoré's team had prioritized homegrown tech over imported vulnerabilities. He uncovered more bribes to fracture alliances with ministers, receiving envelopes via those same consulting ghosts. A particularly damning wire transfer linked a high-ranking official to a Parisian account, the sum enough to buy silence, but not loyalty. Traoré's shock turned to steel. He paced his boots, echoing like thunder, vowing to expose the rot. Outside in the villages, the early impacts shone bright against the brewing storm. Education soared, schools extended hours, internet bridging gaps that once isolated minds. Health metrics improved dramatically. Vaccines, stable, surgeries, lit, mortality rates plummeting. Economies hummed, farmers diversified, women started businesses under reliable lights, jobs sprouting like seeds in fertile soil. Yet the threats loomed, anonymous calls warning of accidents, at sites drones spotted overhead, and a growing dossier on international pushback. The West's narrative painted Traoré as a rogue, their media spinning tales of instability to justify intervention. But he knew the truth. This was about control, about keeping Africa on its knees, extracting wealth while denying light. The trigger pulled tighter with a bombshell conference in Algiers, where Traoré, excluded from Western-backed summits, hosted his own with African brothers. There, amid handshakes and strategies, a defector slipped him intel plans to sabotage the AES Grid's rollout, embedding clauses that would allow foreign oversight of the cabled underbelly. Traoré's heart pounded with betrayal's sting, his mind flashing to the continent's history, slavery's chains, colonialism's yoke, now repackaged as development aid. He gritted his teeth over visions of his people suffering, fuel for his unquenchable fire. This marathon wasn't abstract. It was personal. A war on dignity disguised as diplomacy. As the night deepened, Traoré stood alone on a rooftop staring at the sporadic city lights. The AES Grid would be the battleground, a symbol of unity against division. But the shadows were closing in, and the next move would demand everything. The intrigue wove deeper with emails revealing a network of spies embedded in aid organizations, their reports feeding back to capitals that viewed Africa's self-reliance as a threat. Traoré uncovered a clause in a proposed loan: strategic access to military zones overlapping Yelain sites, a veiled grab for bases that could monitor the Sahel's pulse. His shock rippled through him. How dare they? In response, he ramped up countermeasures, bolstering ties with Algeria, Russia, and China for tech and training, empowering local engineers to build resilience. But the human cost gnawed at him. Reports of villages still dark where kids coughed from lamp fumes, mothers labored in shadow. "This ain't progress," he confided to Malik. "It's predation." The conflict crystallized. Yelain's successes were the spark, but the West's hidden agendas, the powder keg ready to explode into a fight for Africa's soul. As tensions mounted, Traoré's resolve hardened like forged steel. He dispatched teams to secure sites, uncovering tampered equipment wires, cut panels smashed under cover of night. Whispers of a mole in the inner circle surfaced, a minister whose lavish home betrayed foreign gifts. The emotional toll weighed heavy. Traoré's nights haunted by what-ifs, his days fueled by rage at the former masters who couldn't let go. The AES Grid loomed as the ultimate prize, a decade-long plan for stable power, digital independence, and political solidarity. But the leaks painted a target: no bases, no compromises. International backlash intensified, trades stalled visas, denied media smears, labeling him a dictator. Yet in the villages, folks rallied their lit homes, a testament to what's possible when Africa leads. The Mautuan peaked in a classified briefing where Traoré laid out the conspiracy payoffs, clauses, delays, all threads in a web to strangle sovereignty. Aminata's voice trembled with anger. "They fear our light because it exposes their darkness." Malik nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. Traoré's inner storm raged. He chendong at the depth of betrayal, Nghienrang against the injustice. This was the Ngoino, the spark that would ignite the Cao Trao. The fight for light was now a war for freedom, and Traoré, the son of the Sahel, would not yield. The air in Ouagadougou's conference hall crackled with tension, a storm brewing under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of a long table, maps of the AES Grid spread before him like a battlefield. His military fatigues, creased from relentless days, clung to his broad frame as he faced a room packed with allies and adversaries. Ministers from Burkina Faso's inner circle sat alongside envoys from Mali, Niger, and Chad, their eyes fixed on Traoré. Across the table, a French ambassador and a Western aid official shifted uncomfortably, their polished suits a stark contrast to the Sahel's raw urgency. Outside, a crowd gathered, villagers and journalists buzzing with rumors of a historic stand. Traoré's gaze was steel, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "You call this aid?" he thundered, slamming a fist on the table, rattling glasses. "I call it shackles on our future." The room froze. Aminata, his advisor, stood to his left, her tablet clutched tight, her eyes blazing with pride. Malik, his bodyguard, flanked the door, his hand steady on his holster, scanning for any sudden moves. The leaked memo detailing Western demands for military bases near Yelain's solar grids lay open on the table, its words a smoking gun. Traoré pointed to it, his voice rising. "This isn't partnership. This is occupation dressed in promises." The ambassador's smile faltered, his pen tapping nervously. Traoré didn't pause. He slid another document forward, a hacked email exposing bribes to a Burkinabe minister funneled through a Parisian consulting firm. The minister, seated near the end, paled, his hands trembling. "You sold our light for their gold." Traoré snapped, his words slicing through the silence. "You're done." In a flash, he nodded to Malik. The bodyguard moved like lightning, signaling security to escort the minister out. Gasps rippled through the room as cameras flashed, capturing the betrayal for the world to see. Traoré turned to the crowd, his voice steady but fierce. The people deserve the truth. Yelain isn't just power, it's our dignity. And we won't trade it for bases or bribes. The villagers outside erupted in cheers, their voices carrying through the open windows a chorus of defiance against centuries of exploitation. Traoré's heart pounded, fueled by the faces of kids now studying under electric lights, mothers surviving childbirth in powered clinics, farmers grinding grain past dusk. This was their fight, and he was their shield. The climax surged as Traoré pivoted to the AES Grid, his grand vision to link 12 nations, powering 250 million people while banning foreign military footprints. He faced the Western envoys, his words deliberate. You want access? Build your bases elsewhere. Our land, our rules. The ambassador sputtered, citing security concerns, but Traoré cut him off. Security? You mean control? We've seen your chains before slavery colonies, now this. No more. He turned to his African allies, his voice rising like a drumbeat. We build this grid together. Mali, Niger. Chad, we stand as one. Not for your contracts, but for our children. Action exploded beyond words. Traoré ordered immediate countermeasures, partnerships with Algeria, Russia, and China to secure solar tech and training bypassing Western delays. He deployed local engineers to fortify Yelain sites, their hands wiring the future, while Malik's teams patrolled for saboteurs. In a daring move, he revealed a thwarted 2027 cyber attack on the AES fiber optic network, proof of its digital sovereignty, shielding education, health, and defense data from prying eyes. They tried to hack our dreams, he declared, holding up a flash drive with the attack's logs. But we're not your colony anymore. The hall roared with applause as Traoré laid out the stakes. The AES Grid would slash energy costs by 30%, export power to North Africa and Europe, and unite the Sahel against division. But the West's threats loomed, sanctions, frozen loans, media smears, painting him as a rogue. He didn't flinch. Let them try, he said, his eyes locking on the cameras. We're lighting up 150 villages and counting. Schools are open at night. Clinics save lives. Farmers feed nations. This is our power, not yours. He paused, letting the weight sink in. You call it rebellion. I call it freedom. The decision was final, no compromises. Traoré rejected the tainted aid package, its clauses a trap, to seize Burkina Faso's resources. Instead, he rallied his people, calling for volunteers to protect grids from sabotage drones. Spotted wires cut panels, smashed under cover of night. He empowered local talent, sidelining foreign experts who'd embedded spies in their ranks. In a masterstroke, he hosted an African energy summit in Algiers, snubbing Western-led forums that had excluded him. There he forged pacts with allies, securing funds and tech to scale Yelain into the AES Grid, a beacon of self-reliance. The emotional peak hit as Traoré stepped to a podium, cameras rolling. This is our line in the sand, he said, his voice a mix of fire and calm. They want our gold, our land, our souls. But we're done bowing. Yelain is our spark and the AES Grid is our fire. Africa will shine not by their permission, but by our will. The crowd surged, chanting his name, their voices echoing the resilience of a people too long oppressed. Traoré stood tall, the weight of betrayal lifting, replaced by the unyielding resolve of a warrior who'd chosen his people over power's temptations. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, he'd turned the tide, exposing the enemy and igniting a movement that no shadow could dim. The sun dipped low over Ouagadougou, casting golden rays across a city pulsing with newfound hope. In the heart of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré stood on a makeshift stage in a village square, surrounded by faces that glowed under the soft hum of Yelain's solar lights. Children clutched books, their eyes bright with dreams, no longer bound by darkness. Mothers cradled infants saved by powered clinics, their smiles a testament to lives preserved. Farmers' hands calloused but hearts full nodded in pride as their machines whirred nearby, turning harvests into futures. Traoré's voice rose above the crowd, steady as the Sahel's ancient baobabs, carrying the weight of a truth too long suppressed. This isn't just about flipping a switch, he said, his words cutting through the evening air like a blade through chains. This is about reclaiming our dignity, about shattering the shadows that have dimmed our continent for centuries. He paused, letting the moment breathe. The crowd leaned in their silence, a sacred vow. Behind him, a banner fluttered emblazoned with the AES Grid's emblem, a web of lines connecting Burkina Faso to Mali, Niger, Chad, and beyond a promise to power 250 million souls across 12 nations. Traoré's gaze swept over the people, his people who'd endured the weight of exploitation from slavery's scars to colonialism's yoke now repackaged as aid with strings attached. His voice deepened, resonant with the fire of a leader who'd stared down betrayal and emerged unbowed. They offered gold signatures, promises of progress, he declared, pointing to the horizon where Western capitals schemed. But our freedom needs no permission. Our light burns from within. The message swelled personal, yet universal, a call that echoed from village to continent. Yelain had transformed 150 community schools buzzing with night classes, internet bridging gaps to global knowledge. Clinics humming with refrigerated vaccines, slashing deaths that once tore families apart. Markets thriving past dusk, women launching businesses, jobs sprouting like seeds in fertile soil. But Traoré's vision stretched further, to the AES Grid, a monument to African unity. It wasn't just wires and panels. It was a fortress of self-reliance, slashing energy costs by 30%, exporting power to North Africa and Europe on African terms, and weaving a fiber optic network for digital sovereignty, secure data for education, telemedicine, farming, and defense, free from Western eyes. In 2027, that network had repelled a cyber attack. A victory Traoré held up like a trophy. They tried to hack our future, he said, his voice rising, but we built our own shield. He stepped closer to the crowd, his fatigues catching the glow of a nearby lamp, his eyes alight with conviction. The French called it cooperation. The West called it investment. I call it surrender, and I will not bow. The words landed like thunder, igniting cheers that shook the square. Traoré raised a hand, his tone shifting to a leader's solemn vow. Yelain is our spark, the AES Grid our flame. It's not just power, it's our right to stand tall, to decide our own path, to light up our homes, our minds, our hearts. This is Africa's dignity, won not by their charity, but by our unbreakable will. The crowd roared, a sea of fists raised their voices, a chorus of resilience echoing the spirit of ancestors who'd fought and bled for freedom. He painted a vivid picture, light piercing the darkness of rural nights, chains of dependency, snapping a Sahel united against division. The AES Grid was more than infrastructure. It was a political awakening, a refusal to let foreign bases or bribes dim the continent's rise. Traoré's words wove a tapestry of hope and defiance, speaking to every soul who'd felt the sting of oppression, every heart that yearned for justice. They fear our light because it exposes their darkness, he said, his voice softening, almost reverent. But we are the sons and daughters of a land that has endured, that has risen, that will shine brighter than their lies. He pointed to the stars above, a metaphor for the continent's boundless potential. This is our time, not theirs, ours. As the crowd chanted his name, Traoré's message soared beyond Burkina Faso, a clarion call to the diaspora, to African Americans who knew the fight against systemic chains, who cherished Africa's heartbeat. He spoke to their pride, their pain, their power. We're building a future where our children don't beg, where our nations don't kneel, where our light blinds those who'd keep us in shadow. The square erupted, voices blending into a song of unity, a testament to a people reclaiming their place. Traoré stood firm, the embodiment of resistance, his words a beacon. Africa's soul is awake, and no one can dim its glow. The night air in Ouagadougou buzzed with the hum of new life as Yelain's solar grids cast a soft glow over villages once swallowed by darkness. In a quiet corner of the capital, President Ibrahim Traoré stood on a rooftop overlooking a skyline dotted with flickers of progress lights that signaled schools open, late clinics saving lives, farmers building futures. His military fatigues hung loose after weeks of relentless work, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see the AES Grid's web stretching across the Sahel, linking Burkina Faso to Mali, Niger, Chad, and beyond. The promise was alive: 250 million people, powered, costs slashed by 30%, a digital backbone shielding Africa's data from prying eyes. Yet, As the stars glittered above, a shadow lingered in Traoré's mind. The fight for light had won a battle, but the war was far from over. In his hand, a crumpled note slipped to him during the Algiers summit bore a cryptic warning. The next strike comes from within. His jaw tightened, the words echoing the betrayals he'd already uncovered. Bribed ministers sabotaged equipment. Western schemes to choke Yelain's spark. Aminata, his advisor, joined him, her face etched with worry. Ibrahim, our intel caught chatter, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Someone close, too close, is feeding them plans. Malik, ever the silent guardian, shifted nearby, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the rooftops for unseen threats. The note hinted at a deeper conspiracy, rogue allies within the AES Grid nations tempted by foreign gold or operatives embedded in the very teams building the grid. Traoré's heart thudded, not with fear, but with the resolve of a man who'd faced down empires and refused to bend. He folded the note, slipping it into his pocket, his mind racing. The AES Grid was more than wires and panels. It was a symbol of African unity, a defiance of centuries of exploitation. But symbols draw enemies. Reports had surfaced of drones circling remote sites, their origins untraced. A cyber probe blocked just weeks ago hinted at vulnerabilities in the fiber optic network, meant to secure education, health, and defense data. And now this note suggested fracture among the Sahel's brothers' leaders, wavering under pressure, lured by promises of wealth or threats of sanctions. Traoré's voice was low, steady. They think they can divide us, he told Aminata, his gaze fixed on the glowing city. But they don't know our strength. The T's unfurled like a storm on the horizon. Traoré turned to the crowd below, their cheers still echoing from his speech, a reminder of the people's unbreakable spirit. "This isn't the end," he murmured almost to himself. "The shadows never sleep." He envisioned the next chapter, saboteurs targeting the grid's expansion, covert deals to undermine the no-basis clause, or a traitor within the ranks ready to sell out the dream of 250 million souls. The stakes were higher now. Digital sovereignty, economic freedom, a united Sahel standing tall against a world that preferred it broken. "You won't believe who's pulling the strings," he said softly, his words a hook for what lay ahead, a promise of revelations that would shake the continent. The scene shifted to a village lit by Yelain's glow, where a child read under a bulb, unaware of the battles fought to keep that light alive. Traoré's mission was clear. Protect this spark, scale it across nations, and expose the hands trying to snuff it out. The cliffhanger hung heavy. But what if the betrayal runs deeper than we know? What if the next attack comes not from Paris or Washington, but from the heart of our own circle? The crowd's chants faded into the night, leaving a question that burned like a fuse. Who could Traoré trust when the enemy wore a friend's face? The series beckoned a saga of Africa's fight for true independence. Future episodes loomed battles against climate exploitation, masking as aid, digital wars over data control, or the struggle to keep the Sahel's alliance unbroken. Traoré's voice lingered, a whisper to the audience. Stay with us because the fight for our light is just beginning. The rooftop scene closed with him staring into the distance, the AES Grid's promise glowing faintly against the night, a beacon of hope under siege. For African Americans watching, the call resonated, a story of resilience, of a continent rising, of a people who'd never bow again. The battle was won, but the war for Africa's soul raged on, and Traoré's defiance was only the start. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about all of us. It's about reclaiming what was taken, rebuilding what was denied, and remembering what was never lost: our power, our dignity, and our right to decide. So if this moved, you don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, share the story, add your voice in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and what you're fighting for, because this isn't just a video, it's a signal. And together we are the spirit of Africa.